Alrighty, my guest today is one of Australia's leading voices on AI. He's a keynote speaker who has taken the stage at the UN in Geneva. He's an author who's held the Chief AI Officer role, and he's a mentor to boards and executives on how to actually adopt AI. He spent more than 35 years in the corporate world before becoming one of the most listened to people in the country on where AI is heading. And these days, he's putting his money where his mouth is, as CEO of Sovereign Australia AI, building the case and the capability for Australia to own its own AI rather than rent it from overseas. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and thanks for overselling me in the intro.
Should we just kick off, get into it?
Yeah, let fire away.
Tell us about Sovereign Australia AI, because a lot of people still haven't heard of you.
This now just turned into a 3-hour podcast. No, Sovereign Australia AI is a push to try and start building sovereign capability here in Australia. And we're starting with a large language model because that's the most used thing in corporate Australia today. And our claim is that, you know, so long as you're using models by US builders or China builders, somebody else holds the on-off switch. And we saw this very recently with Anthropic having to turn off its model because the US president made a decision. Similarly, people talk about getting open weight models and, you know, downloading them and tuning them a little. And that's a good first step. But that's not what Australia should be relying on, because we're still beholden to whoever built that original model. And we don't know what bias was introduced into that model. Was the data for it sourced ethically? We don't know any of those things. And so we want a model that's built right here. It still needs to be a world model, a global model, because, you know, you've still got to be able to answer where is the Sahara Desert and how long is the Nile River. But we want more Australian content than what the large models have. And we want to know exactly how it was built from the ground up, what biases were or were not introduced, and is it aligned to Australian vernacular, culture, and law? You know, does it comply with the copyright law, with the privacy law, with all of that type of stuff? So there's a lot of great reasons to do this right here in Australia.
And why do you think we haven't done it yet? Why do you think we haven't invested the amount of money that's required?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons for that. And the first one I'll call out is the government. The government are going around and around and around in talkfest after talkfest, but not really putting money in behind creating sovereign capability in this country. You know, compared to, say, the UK that has a £500 million sovereign AI fund, the US pouring in similar money from the government, or, you know, enabling architecture or something to help that along. That's just not happening in Australia. Australia can't see the burning bridge. In fact, right now, Anthropic is trying to negotiate that if they bring hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment, the Australian government will cut a hole through copyright law for them. It's not what we should be doing, and the government don't get that. So the money has to come from private investment. And a lot of the investment firms, particularly in Australia, simply don't understand AI at a deep enough level to know what they're investing in. They understand data centers, they understand AI applications, but they don't understand the nuances of the model. And so we often hear things like, oh, we couldn't possibly compete with ChatGPT. And the reality is we don't need to compete with ChatGPT. If you talk to just about any chief AI officer worth their salt, what they're going to tell you is that for the majority of their workflows and things that they're trying to do, they don't need a 1.6 trillion parameter model that can, you know, understand ancient Egyptian Sanskrit and knows how to disarm a nuclear device. They just don't need that. What they need is a smaller, therefore more cost-effective and more power-effective, a smaller language model that is more highly tuned to Australia. But the investment community doesn't get that yet. It's starting, but it's a long haul.
Do you think it's more... So do you think the gap in understanding is that you don't need one of those frontier models, or does it go deeper? Does it go into more the technicals behind how these LLMs work?
It's a bit of both, Mac. It really is. So yes, it's there's a little bit of we can't build frontier, or we shouldn't build frontier, and I absolutely agree with that. There's no need for more frontier. If you look at how China and the US are building models, China is taking a very practical, pragmatic approach to model building. There's a lot of embedded AI with, a lot of robotics and things like that. America is trying to build God in a box. And we just don't, in business, we just don't need that level of AGI yet, right? That level of AI. So there's a bit of lack of understanding around that. But then there's also just a lack of understanding of how models are being used and the fact that these models are there everywhere. So, Heidi Health is a great Australian AI application. It's doing amazing work with doctors. I love their work. But sitting underneath that Heidi Health AI application is a language model. And the question is, which language model are they using? And does that company even have GPUs in Australia? Because if they don't have graphical processing units here in the country, every time somebody's health discussion gets moved through, it's going to go and get processed in a GPU offshore. Now, yes, we can secure it, we can tokenize it, we can do this, we can do that. But the reality is, and it's happening across government services too, and I'm not just picking on Heidi here, is that the data is being processed offshore. But, the response is, well, we'll invest more in data centers, and that's not quite the answer. I mean, if you think about sovereignty, most times when you say sovereign AI to people, they immediately think of data centers, or they think of the application. Sovereignty, for me, actually lies in about 6 different layers. So there is definitely at the base the architecture, the technology, the hard servers, GPUs, bits and pieces that sit in a data center. They need to be sovereign. Now, we don't make chips in this country, so we have to buy them in, but we can buy them and run them ourselves rather than have AWS or somebody running them that are all subject to the US Cloud Act. And for any of your listeners that haven't looked at the Cloud Act, I would suggest they went and read it because it's really predatory. The next level up is what models are running on those GPUs. Are they our models, or are they a rented model from somebody else? Then you've got the layer of agentic, where we're having agents carry out actions and do multiple things, whether they're autonomous or not. Then you've got your kind of orchestration and control plane layer that also you need to think about, is that sovereign? Or are you using orchestration software from Europe or something? And then, of course, you've got the application layer, which is the layer that you and I interface with every day. And then, of course, the 6th one is governance and regulation, right? And Australia is taking a very, very, very soft approach in just issuing guidelines around but there's no hard and fast rules around what how AI should be used in this country.
I think a lot of people will still struggle to understand why it's important to have sovereignty at the model level. Is there a way we can somehow analogize that or something just to make it really clear to people?
Yeah, look, there is. And, I go back to a joke that I heard from a comedian where he talks about the way in which Australians communicate is that we tell you what things aren't. So if you say, how far is it? Oh, it's not too far. How much was that? Oh, it wasn't that expensive. How are you today? Oh, I'm not too bad. We tell you what things aren't. That's just the way in which we express ourselves. So when my dear old auntie goes to the doctor and she says, how are you today? And my auntie says, oh, I'm not too bad, thanks, doctor. That doesn't mean I'm not too bad. That means I'm really sick. Now, if you don't have a model that understands some of those idiosyncratic things, it's always going to go off in a weird direction. One of the early models that I tried to play with was trying to fine tune a model using a whole lot of Reddit data, and we inadvertently built Bogan AI that swore at you every fourth word and blah blah blah. And that is also a part of our culture. We're a storytelling culture. We tend to do things through stories. We love to take the piss out of each other. And that's actually a sign of affection in Australia, where in the US, that would be considered incredibly rude and aggressive. So, we're highly irreverent and things like that. So all of these cultural vernacular things are not represented in the model, particularly when, for some of those larger models, reportedly, we're around about 1.2% of the data in a model, which is punching above our weight because we're, only about 0.5% of the world's population. But for a model here in Australia, I'd like to see that Australian content at 5%, 7%, 10%. And then we bias the model towards that data first. So when a kid in school types in, what's it like to join the Navy, they hear about the Australian Navy by default, not the US Navy. Right? I've already seen my grandkids talking about candies rather than lollies, talking about sidewalks rather than footpaths. Slowly but surely, we're watering down our Australianism because we're renting so much from the US. Right? Google's already done that to us. Social media's already doing that to us. We don't need AI doing that as well.
Got it. So a big part of this is cultural, maintaining Australia's culture.
Correct. Australians' culture, Australians' values. The US president has told the model builders he expects the next lot of models to come out to be anti-woke. So they can't talk about diversity and inclusion. They can't talk about climate change. Those two things alone are huge to the Australian values. We value diversity and inclusion in this country. We're concerned about climate change in this country. Those things are not going to be reflected in the model, and we have zero influence on how those models are built. Here in Australia, we can have influence on how those models are built. So that's kind of the risk side of why we'd want to do it. There's also a reward side to why we'd want to do it. Currently, no Australian copyright holders are being made whole in any way by any of the global AI builders. They are just taking copyrighted material, using it, and not paying a price for it. I fundamentally disagree with that principle. I think it's wrong. I think copyright holders have to be made whole. And we've already been quite public about, a minimum commitment of 10 million. In reality, I think it's going to be more like 30 million to make sure that the copyright holders that we use are made whole for what they do. But if you think about, if you took the 10 biggest companies in Australia that are really leveraging AI, really getting into agentic, and I'm talking the BHP, Qantas, CommBank, Westpacs of the world, each of them is spending already somewhere in the vicinity of $40 million a year on tokens in these language models. all of that money is flowing offshore. So there's got to be a minimum of $500 million a year just running out the door. Now, whether the companies themselves pay for it or whether it's paid for through the license subscriptions of the applications, right? So you might be using Salesforce as a CRM. Salesforce is using OpenAI's model, so they're paying for the tokens, but you're paying through it through your licensing. One way or the other, all of this economic benefit is flowing offshore. Well, why isn't some of that benefit being kept here? Why isn't it being used to help build our economy rather than continuing to build the Silicon Valley economy? So there are both risk and reward reasons why we'd want to do this.
I'm thinking of how people are going to counter this argument. They might say, oh, well, if we're building, we'll probably get into that, probably not building our own models from scratch. I think
we are.
To start. Oh, we are?
That's what I'm doing.
Okay, let's dig into that first, because I was under the impression we might be taking open weight models and kind of fine-tuning them first, or is that more of the prototype? Or have I got it completely wrong?
No, you've got it right. It is the prototype, right? So one of the first things you want to do, and it's more to convince investors than anybody else, because anybody who knows anything about AI could tell you, yes, you can get in, you can take an open weights model and you can fine tune it. So long as you've got access to compute and you've got a decent data set, you can do that a number of ways. You can truly fine tune. You can use a LoRa approach, just creating a low ranked adapter. There's multiple ways of doing that, but it has limitations. Most people, and the models that are most frequently used are either Llama from Meta, which Meta's a couple of months ago just announced they're not going to support any further or do any further work on. So everybody who's used Llama has just been frozen in time. Or something like Quen out of China. Some of the smaller Mistral models out of France, which are great models. All of those you can download, you can run them on your machine, and you can adjust them and fine-tune them, right? What I call that is domestic, not sovereign. It's here, and we've Australianised it, but it's really only domestic because we still don't know what the base underlying data set was, what was included in that, what wasn't included in that. Will it just start spewing hate speech in 6 months? We don't know. And even when you try to fine tune, a couple of things happen. One is most often you can only influence maybe 50% of the weights. And when you do fine tune, and there was some great research out of Melbourne Uni that showed this, when you do a fine tune, you tend to do it in English. But that doesn't a fine tune in every other language. So if you ask the question of this fine-tuned model in English, you'll get the new answer. But if you ask that same question in Italian, you're probably going to get the old answer, because that was what was in the base training. So tuning your own models, look, there is a place for that, absolutely. If it's a relatively simple use case, you've got the knowledge to be able to do it, you've got access to compute, go for it. Right. But for a lot of companies, they don't have that knowledge, they don't have that experience, they don't have the compute, and they're looking for something that they know and trust right to the bottom. Right. We've got a change coming up in Australia in December with the privacy law, which talks about automated decisioning, and it says that if you're using automated decisioning, AI for decisions, and that is going to somehow impact someone's life, you must be able to explain how AI made that decision. Now, when you don't understand the model that sits underneath, how do you explain the decision? Right? We've got this big black box problem with AI, whereas a model that was built from the ground up here, what we call a foundation model, we are going to understand, because we're going to know the base prompts. We're going to know what the data set was. We're going to know where that data came from. So if the Attorney General comes to me and says, Simon, I want to understand how this was built, I can say, sure, there you go. Base prompt up. This is how we did it. If we go to Anthropic, if we go to OpenAI and say, you have to open up and completely show us how it was built, they're just going to tell us to jump off a bridge, right? They couldn't care less. So these are kind of the reasons why we want to do it. So, yes, we need to assemble a corpus of data. That's probably that is challenge number one. And there's a whole lot of bits that hang off that, which I'll come back to. Challenge number two is just having enough compute to be able to do what we need to do. And we're envisaging that we would need around about 256 Blackwell B300s to be able to do this in a relatively good time. Now, from a size perspective, that makes it bigger than any of the either of the two supercomputers that exist in Australia today. It's definitely bigger than Pusey. So you've got that. And then third is you've got to be able to do all of the training and guardrails and bits and pieces that you need. Right? But when you come back to that corpus of data, you've got a whole pile of things you've got to take into account. How do you make copyright holders whole? How do you meta tag every bit of data that you're getting to know where you got it from, so that should somebody come to me, Mackenzie, you come to me and you say, Simon, you scraped my website, even though I didn't have a robot.txt file, and I don't want my website as a part of your AI model. We need a way that in the next retrain, we can pull that data out so that it isn't part of the model anymore. And, we don't know if they can do that in other parts of the world or not, but we need to be able to do it here. We need to make sure, like I said, that copyright holders are made whole. And then we've got things we should start thinking about, like how do we include the Indigenous voice in this model? Right. And if we just take, because the Indigenous model sets that are around, or data sets that are around, are relatively small comparatively. And if we just dump them into a big model mix, it's going to get so watered down you'd never see it. But you can build in a mixture of experts architecture and then add an expert or tune a part of it just to handle the Indigenous language. Now, this is going to open a can of worms. Which Indigenous language? How do we get that data when traditionally our First Nations brothers and sisters don't tend to write things down? They tell stories, back to the point of that's part of the Australian culture. So it's passed on by story time. So yes, we could go up and record them having a yarn, but is that an appropriate thing to do? Are we appropriating a culture in the wrong way? So we have a whole lot of ethical dilemmas to solve as well. But these are the things that we want to solve at Sovereign Australia AI that Anthropic would have zero interest in.
Got it. Yeah, that's really clear. And so I think what will probably be interesting is to talk about maybe 5 years from now. What do you see the organization looking like? What does success look like?
Oh, okay. Well, 5 years from now, yeah, I'm retired. 5 years from now, 5 years from now, we've definitely moved on from large language models. They're a great starting point because they're low-hanging fruit. They are the ones that are going to move the needle the most for Australia in the very short term, in the next 3 years. I think the organisation still is relatively nimble. I don't see an organisation of much more than 100 people. But working on different types of models for different things, perhaps vision-based models have really leapt ahead and we need to be doing more there for occ health and safety, or, maybe we're partnering heavily with Monash Medical to, help build out more medically tuned models and things like that. It's funny, I do quite a lot of, as you said in the intro, quite a lot of stuff with boards and executives. And they often say to me, what should be our 5-year AI strategy? And I tell them that they've got to be joking. Like 5 years is an eternity in AI. I said to them, if you can write an 18-month AI strategy and stick to it, that's a really good thing. Because it moves and changes so fast. And it's not just the software that is changing, the hardware is changing. Are we going to see more kind of biochip technology racing forward, where it's actually kind of living tissue? Is it? Where is all of that going to go? The current big furor around data centers and their power use and all that sort of stuff. Well, NVIDIA's latest chip is designed to run at more than 30 degrees. It's not going to need to be cooled as much. And so we're seeing changes in hardware just as fast as we're seeing changes in software. And the whole thing in 5 years, I'd love to have a crystal ball and know what that is. Our goal for Australia and Australian business is that we have at least doubled, if not more, the AI adoption in this country in the next 3 years. Because at a mum and dad, you and I level, we have quite high penetration. Like ChatGPT, there's millions and millions of accounts in this country, tens of millions. But how many of those are paid? Pretty small. And how much true adoption is there in corporate Australia? Other than, we rolled out Copilot, so we've done AI. I mean, true AI adoption is very, very low. And every study that's done on this, it comes down to one simple word: trust. Australian organisations, businesses simply do not trust AI yet. Because it's a black box built overseas, because it hallucinates and people think that's a design fault when actually it's a design feature. It does this and it does that. And I've read this article in the newspapers, and, the newspapers love to beat up AI because it's an easy way to sell newspapers. We need to fundamentally shift that needle in Australia and have organisations understand that they can and should trust AI under these circumstances and start using it more. Because some of the simple use cases today can still be quite risky. Let's take a simple use case of, in your call centre, you have the call listened to, transcribed, summarised, and a 50-word summary goes into your CRM, right? It's probably something that you're doing in your own business, Mac, right? Here's the contents of that call, and I'm just going to summarise it and keep that. Okay, that's fantastic. That's a pretty low use risk case. If AI gets it wrong, nobody dies. It's okay. But what if in that call, that person's given you all of their personal details, their passport number, their date of birth? Worse, what if they've talked about their health, their most personal information, or they've given you credit card or banking details in that call? If those things aren't identified and masked before it goes in for transcription and summarization, you're putting all of that data through a model that you don't know how it was built and you don't know where in the world it's being processed. And we're just blindly doing it. This is one of the big problems for Australia right now, in corporate Australia, is that they don't trust. And so one of our big goals is to instill trust. And by the way, trust is linked to transparency. Australians trust stuff that they can see through, right? Or that they can readily understand. Our quick litmus test as to whether or not something is fair is what we refer to as the barbecue test. If I was at a barbecue and I explained to you how this worked, would you go, Oh, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound fair. Or would you say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. That sounds fair. That's our kind of quick litmus test of does it pass the barbecue test? And then we kind of get into that. And that's a cultural thing in Australia. You know, what we think is fair and good in this country is different to what we think is fair and good in the UK, the US, or Canada.
Yeah, that kind of gets me thinking about privacy with, I guess, in the context of our own kind of government as well now. Because that would probably be a challenge.
Let's talk about that for a minute, right? One of the big problems with privacy that we have, for me, is the US Cloud Act. I mentioned it before. The Cloud Act is a piece of American legislation, been around for about 7 or 8 years, I think. Australia signed up to it 2 or 3 years ago. It basically says that the American government can, at its will, compel any American company to share with them the contents of any server anywhere in the world that they either own or lease. And if they are a provider, think Amazon, think Microsoft, think Google, those. If they're a provider, they're not allowed to tell the end client that the government is looking. And, you know, it was the law was designed as an extension of the Patriot Act, and it was to combat counterterrorism. You know, it was not combat counterterrorism, but be counterterrorism and things like that. And, you know, look for drug money and all those good things. But we don't know that it's definitely being used for good. I know of a telco in America that was compelled by the FBI to give them the contents of 5 servers, and those 5 servers held every customer record for that telco. The customer's name, the customer's phone number, what phone numbers they'd been ringing. The government could just look at that. And if you had a server at your house, Mac, and the American government wanted to look at it, and it's not owned by an American company, the only way they can do that is they reach out through this agreement to the Australian government. The Australian government have to go and get a High Court ruling, or it could go all the way to the High Court, get a ruling to say that you must disclose the data that they're looking for, and then they can compel you to do that. So we have a really nice judicial process. In America, that's not the case. If the FBI want it, the FBI say, I want this, you must give it to me. And they're compelled to do it. If not, they're taken to court by the FBI. So think about in Australia, we have the My Health services and all those government services. Most of them are hosted in AWS.
Really?
All of that comes under the US Cloud Act. So all of this is going on in the background, and most people, when I tell them, like I'm telling you now, have that response of, holy crap, they what? You know, if you're a government entity, where are you buying your storage from? You're buying it from AWS, you're buying it from Google, you're buying it from Microsoft or through Azure, whatever it is. Now, they will tell you, oh yes, but those servers are in Australia, in an Australian data center. Great. But the server is still owned by an American company, so the US Cloud Act still applies. So almost where the server sits now becomes irrelevant. It might as well be sitting in Texas because the US government can look in it anyway. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on. This is why you often won't hear the larger organizations, the large tech providers, talking about sovereignty, because it's very inconvenient for them. Very inconvenient. You know, and when you back that up with just recently Marco Rubio, the US senator, sent a message out to all of the outposts, all of the embassies around the world, with the simple message of, you should be lobbying the government of your country that you're in to not go down the path of sovereign storage, to not go down the path of sovereign systems, to not go down, because it's not in our best interest. So these US government officials are out lobbying governments around the world not to focus on sovereignty.
I didn't know any of that.
It's a critical game. It really is. But they've got the big money to put behind it that'll convince you and I that it's safe and sound and secure.
And they're already in our heads with ChatGPT talking to us every day.
Correct.
So are you guys? So you're predominantly focusing on the model layer for now,
Yes.
but are you hoping to kind of get into the, I guess, like the data center spaces?
No, there are great data center providers in this country, you know, from the physical data centers. I'm talking NextDC, CDC, Goodman's, Australian-owned companies that are doing this, Firmus. And then there are Australian-owned companies that are managing and running GPUs and servers and whatnot. So Reset Data, Xenon Systems, companies like that are Australian-owned, Australian-controlled, and Australian-board. They're headquartered here. We can utilise those Australian companies for that part of the value chain. We see more than enough work for ourselves just in the model layer, let alone in the agentic, the control plane, and the applications layers. We think we'll wind up doing a lot of work with applications because, you know, if you're a federal government department and you're using SAP, Salesforce, pick a big application, at some point you're going to say, well, for this process, I want you to use a sovereign model to do that. So those guys are going to have to come and talk to us and say, we want to license your model to do this and this. So there will be some interplay, but we are focusing just at that model layer. We'd encourage 10 other companies to get in and build other models and stuff too. We'd love to see, like, we have a couple of sovereign built models built here. Leonardo is a great example, right? It's an image generation model built right here. I do love it when investors and others say, oh, I'm not even sure we could build a model like that in Australia. And I just kind of look at them, you know, we built Wi-Fi, we built Google Maps, we built the black box recorder, we designed pacemakers. We have our AI on the International Space Station right now. So why couldn't Australia do this? It's almost like there's a lack of willpower. We've kind of rolled over and said, America's too big and too far down the path for us to bother. Well, if you play that argument out, you might as well collapse the army and the navy, because if China decided to attack, we don't possibly have a strength big enough to repel them. So, you know what I mean? It's kind of become a bit of a defeatist attitude, when in actual fact, Australia should be pushing ahead.
Yeah, 100%. And we've got such a good environment for it as well.
Oh my God.
I mean, we've got the energy, we've got the security, we've got there's the stability, like there's a lot of things going for us.
Yeah, we've got social stability, economic stability, political stability. As you say, we have more than enough room. We have more than enough power, particularly from renewables. You know, I love a sunburnt country. Well, if it's sunburnt, it should be producing sun power. You know, we have all of this stuff. We've got incredible talent in this country. You know, the human capital is just so high. The main person behind DeepSeek, the model that was built for DeepSeek, did his training here in Australia and then went back to China and built DeepSeek. You know, we have those kinds of people. Plus we have immigration that is bringing in specialist skills. And the reason that they're coming here is that, you know, it's exactly what we're talking about. It's a place where you can thrive and have great business and build great AI. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't do it. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that by building an Australian model, just to, bring it back to what I'm doing, I don't think that by building an Australian model, every company in Australia is going to say, right, stop using OpenAI, stop using Claude, stop using Mistral, just use it. No. We're going to be one of a blend of models, and you use different models for different things. If you need the frontier capability, the code writing capability, the reasoning capability of one of those frontier models, go right ahead. But if you need true sovereign capability, you need to keep the data here, it's very secure and all of that sort of stuff, you might come to us. Or if you want your user interface, be that a customer chatbot or something, to sound more Australian, understand more Australian, be more Australian, you may come to us. Now, Accenture late last year published a great report on sovereign AI globally, and their estimation was that about 30% of all agentic processes of that workload would need sovereign capability. Personally, I think that number is too high. I think they've over-egged it. I think it's more in the land of 15% or 20%. But even so, today, we can't service that 15% because we have no sovereign capability. And what we're doing, we're negotiating with Anthropic to give them a hole in copyright law. We're getting handed a blueprint from OpenAI that says, here's your blueprint for AI, Australia. Who the hell are they to get to come in and tell Australia how we're going to do AI? We've got some brilliant brains in this country and we just need to use them better. There's some wonderful people in academia that just know this stuff backwards, but they're like lone voices out there calling it out.
Yeah. It does feel like a matter of time, though. I feel like, given what Brian was saying last week, I don't know how much he couldn't share too much, but it seems like we're kind of on the precipice of this being, you guys taking off and getting everyone kick-started.
We're ready to go. We are absolutely ready to roll. We just need funding and support. And we're getting a lot more discussion since Anthropic just turned off Fable 5, and they turned it off at 6 p.m. on a Friday, our time. If a company had already started including that in their agentic process, they probably wouldn't know till Monday morning. And imagine that that's a Bendigo bank doing payment processing, and they're using that model as part of the payment process, and that whole thing grinds to a halt for 48 hours. That's billions of dollars worth of payments that don't happen, things like that. So there are some really catastrophic level risks here that I think Australia's going to wake up to. They haven't quite yet.
I think we're close. That's my feeling.
I hope you're right, Mackenzie. I hope you're right. Like I said, some of the big companies are getting it, but the traditional investors, because we are a startup, the institutional investors usually don't talk to startups. It's rare. So we've been talking to family offices, high net worth individuals, some of the VC funds. None of them yet can see that burning bridge. They're still stuck at, we can't compete with ChatGPT, or why don't we just download a free model and tune it? They don't yet get those nuances. They will. I'm just hoping it's not too late.
Yeah. And is there anything else that you think people need to know about this topic? Is there anything that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
The only other thing that people need to really be aware of is scratching at the chipping paint, right? If you see a little chip in the paint, scratch at it. If somebody tells you, yes, we're Australian owned, what does that mean? are you, is it 51% of the shareholders are Australian? Is the final mother organisation, is that, because you could have an Australian company that's owned by a US entity because you were raising capital there or something, and those shareholders are Australians. And some people will say, well, that's Australian owned. Well, it's not, because that mother company is US, it comes under the Cloud Act. So if you really want to understand sovereignty, you have to dig a little into who is this company, where are they headquartered, who owns them, all of that. So, where are they paying taxes? But also, is there a tie back to America? If it's an Australian company that has a French parent, well, it's probably not as bad because France doesn't have the equivalent of the US Cloud Act. But you just want to, be sure of what sovereign really is, and who's claiming it and who's not.
And so I guess going back to the question I had about 5 years from now, I know that's a really long way to see out, but in essence, you'll have hopefully in the next couple of years, hopefully a decent size but nimble team focusing on that model development layer, and you'll be creating different models for different use cases for various businesses and governments across Australia, and they'll have an Australian kind of context, so they'll feel more Australian, hopefully, and there'll be an option for people to have a sovereign model when they need it, instead of having to rely on these frontier models or US-based companies for everything.
Correct.
And that could be like with in your example with bank payments, maybe one of the big four banks will use one of your models for batch processing payments, for example.
Yep, or for their wealth manager. All right, so for people like you and I that don't have billions of dollars and don't get a dedicated wealth manager, but we still want some wealth advice, you may want to do that. The other thing I think that will happen across that time is that we have neighbours that don't necessarily have everything that we have. And they may come to us, New Zealand may come to us and say, could you help with a New Zealand sovereign model? Fiji may say, could you help? That would require you and I to go to Fiji for a couple of months, I think, Mac. Just to make sure.
Months, so.
Exactly. Vanuatu, someone like that may come to us and say, look, you've done this before, we want you to do it again. And for a lot of those smaller nations, and I think even I kind of see what I think is going to happen for us here in Australia, for Sovereign Australian AI, is the approach that has just been taken in the UK. So in the UK, there's a company called Cosign. They have been granted quite a lot of money from their government in terms of the government gave them the compute power that they needed. Let's say roughly 30 million Aussie, give or take, worth of compute power that the government gave them. But a lot of large institutions have partnered in with them. So they've got BT and they've got British Airways and they've got Lloyds Bank and NatWest and all of those types of banks and companies involved, so that they can all start to get models. So it's a very B2B or B2G focused business. The same will be for us. We will focus on B2B and B2G, not B2C. And the reason that we don't want to go B2C is that when you get to consumers like you and I using AI, we're going to ask everything from what is this wart on my big toe through to I want to understand more about, the science of blah, blah, blah. And so you need larger models that can do more. You want one model that can answer a question and draw you a picture and reason something out and read and so that's much bigger to build and way more expensive to run. So the reason that a lot of these big Silicon Valley AI companies haven't yet really turned profitable is that the amount of compute power that they need to stand up for all of these free users makes it really, really hard. And at the same time, they're investing in the next thing and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. If you look at a business like Cosine in the UK, even Mistral out of France, they only really play, yes, they have Le Chat, but they really only play in that B2B space and B2G space. And I think that's kind of where we'll wind up in the next few years. So mums and dads will probably keep using ChatGPT, keep using Claude, and whoever else decides to come on in. But from a business perspective, there will be a requirement for sovereignty.
It's going to be huge. I mean, I guess I've been lightly in contact with you for maybe since the end of last year or so, and the CTO. But even since then, I mean, it's been 6 months, 7 months, and things have changed a lot. A lot of people that I speak to, because I do the kind of AI and data related recruitment, a lot of these guys are asking the same questions. It's coming up in conversations all the time. So it's getting there. It's getting there.
Yeah, like I said, there's a whole group of us that are just like, oh, come on, we just want to get started with it. Just let us get going. As you build new things, you don't always get them right. Okay, it's a little like snow skiing. You know, if you're not falling down, you're just not trying hard enough. We're going to stumble, we're going to fall, we're going to make mistakes. We know that sort of stuff. But we can plan for that. We can work around that. You know, that's the Australian get out there with a bit of fencing wire and rig up something that makes it work. We're going to see that in Australia. And my honest hope is that the work that we do at Sovereign Australia AI encourages other companies, other founders, other startup groups to actually take a punt and try and build some stuff from the ground up, because we build some amazing tech here in this country and we just need to do more of it.
Absolutely. One final thought I just had. Very simple, but I think this is since the introduction of the modern LLM, and maybe when we got to GPT 3 or 4, we started to see the birth of one of the most transformative technologies ever, maybe the most transformative, with Fable and Mythos. It's unbelievable, and we're only just getting started. And it does seem totally ridiculous to me that here in Australia we're kind of letting other countries just get along with this technology. We're not thinking about building with our own. It doesn't make sense. Why? It's like, I don't know what a good analogy is, but in Europe they've started figuring out you can use coal to generate power, and we're just like, oh, let's just import power from them. What? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, that's my.
You hit the nail right on the head. It doesn't make sense, and people don't get it yet. We did the same thing with cars. We used to manufacture cars in this country. We just gave up, and now we import every vehicle. So if there's a problem with shipping, Australia gets no new cars. Hello, Strait of Hormuz. We dig all of this stuff up out of the ground and we sell it to another country to process it, and then we buy it back. We just have a history of doing this stuff over and over and over. But the real risk around AI is that we actually wind up in a state of digital colonization, where by default, one way or the other, we're either colonized by the US or we're absolutely turned off. So let me give you a final scenario. Imagine that Australia goes to war with China. A month into the war, we realize we can't win. And so we say, all right, China, we're going to side with you. We'll work closely with you. We'll become closer partners, blah, blah, blah. What's America going to do? they're going to turn off everything that we have access to. They're just going to turn off our AI. They're going to turn off our data storage. And we'll go back to the dark ages. We won't be an economic powerhouse in any way, shape or form. And yet we're doing nothing to protect ourselves. Nothing at all. You know, the type of compute, the type of dollars that we need to build a sovereign LLM is less than a 1-day spend on Australia's defence. We spend more every day than what it would take to build a model here. But we don't do it.
What a great place to finish up. Simon, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it. And to everyone who's still listening, thank you for coming along and joining us on the journey.
Mac, it's been my absolute pleasure. If people want to reach out and connect with me, they can do that through LinkedIn. That'd be great.
Thanks, Simon. All right. See you later.